The pre-dawn air clung to the women like a damp shroud. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary moved in lockstep. Sandals crunched gravel, path wound rock, that seemed to press inward from the darkness. They carried jars of spices, their knuckles white from gripping the clay vessels. Each woman kept her head low, eyes fixed on the uneven ground to avoid stumbling in the gloom. The silence was absolute, a heavyweight that filled the space between them. They walked for minutes without a word, the only sound the rhythmic scraping of their feet. Halfway up the final incline, Mary Magdalene stopped. She shifted the weight of her jar, her breath hitching in the cold air. The other Mary mirrored the motion, her shoulders tight, her jaw set against the exhaustion of the long night. They stood still for a heartbeat, resumed their climb. The tomb loomed ahead, a dark shape carved into the hillside, waiting in the stillness. The path leveled out. The ground beneath their feet groaned. It started as a low vibration, a hum that rattled the jars in their hands, then surged into a violent, rhythmic bucking. The earth split. Gravel sprayed into the air as the path heaved upward, knocking the women off balance. They hit the dirt hard, palms scraping against sharp rock. Before they could scramble upright, a sound like a thunderclap tore through the silence. A bolt of white light slammed into the ground directly in front of the tomb, turning the gray morning into blinding, searing noon. The air grew hot, ionized, and thick. At the tomb's entrance, the Roman guards were thrown backward, as if struck by a physical force. They collapsed into the dust, their metal gear clattering against the stones with a hollow, discordant ring. They lay motionless, eyes wide and fixed on the void. Then, the light coalesced. An angel stood atop the stone slab, his presence radiating. His form flickered, shifting like the base of a flame, casting long, erratic shadows across the hillside. The women pressed their backs against the cold earth, breath trapped in their chests, watching as the supernatural light swallowed the morning. The angel stood immovable, his gaze fixed on the women huddled in the dust. He gestured toward the dark interior of the tomb, his hand glowing with a steady, pulsing light. "He's not here," the angel said, his voice vibrating through the very air, deep and resonant. "He has risen." The women scrambled to their feet, their hands shaking as they dropped the spice jars. They leaned forward, peering into the tomb. The stone slab was bare. The linen wrappings lay discarded in a heap, empty and hollow. A cold wind whipped through the entrance, carrying the scent of dry earth. They turned and sprinted back toward the city, their breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Their feet pounded against the loose gravel, kicking up clouds of dust. Suddenly, the path ahead shimmered, the light bending and distorting the horizon. A figure stood directly in their way, solid and still. They dropped to the dirt, reaching out to wrap their arms around his feet, their faces pressed against the ground in a mix of terror and sudden, blinding joy. "Go to Galilee," the figure said. The women looked up, their eyes wide, as the figure remained motionless before them, the morning light catching the dust motes. The temple courtyard echoed with the frantic, uneven footsteps of the Roman guards. They stumbled through the gates, their breathing ragged and shallow. Their metal gear was covered in thick, gray grit, and deep dents marred the surface of their breastplates. They stood before the chief priests, their bodies trembling as they stammered out the account of the blinding light and the empty tomb. The priests paced the stone floor, their brows furrowed, their faces twisting into masks of calculated agitation. They stopped, exchanging sharp, knowing glances that cut through the guards' panic. One priest reached into his heavy robes and pulled out a leather pouch. He slammed it onto the stone table with a dull, heavy thud. The coins inside clinked sharply, a cold, metallic sound that silenced the room. "Tell everyone the disciples stole the body while you slept," the priest hissed, leaning forward until his face was inches from the soldiers. The guards stared at the silver, their hands shaking as they reached out to tuck the pouch away. They turned and stepped out into the streets, their heads bowed. Days later, The 11 disciples stood in a tight cluster on a windswept mountain in Galilee. They scanned the horizon, their brows furrowed in lingering confusion. A figure appeared on the crest of the hill, moving toward them with steady, purposeful strides. The disciples fell to their knees as the figure stopped before them. Jesus raised his hands, and the wind died down, leaving a sudden, absolute stillness over the slope. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me," he said. His voice carried clearly across the ridge. He looked at each of them. "Go and make disciples of all nations. Baptize them. Teach them to obey everything I have commanded." He met their gaze, then vowed, "I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Their expressions shifted from hesitation to a hard, quiet resolve. They turned as one and began their descent down the mountain, moving toward the world below.